Hello, I'm Roy Steinberg. I'm the producing artistic director at Cape May Stage, and I'm so grateful that you could join us. We've been having these little discussions with some of the tools we use to make theater, and today we're going to talk to Hao Bai about sound design. Welcome. Hi there.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you
Well,
for having me.
we're so pleased. Tell us a little bit about how you got interested in sound. What made you decide to become, that's something most people don't even know about.
Uh, um, it's a long story. That's like I can start with how I got into theater first, then sound.
Sure.
Like I grew up in China, and I didn't have any understanding or experiences with theater since there were not one single theater company in my hometown. And only big cities like Beijing or Shanghai, they have some theater companies. Even now, like when I go back to home, my family and friends still have hard time understanding what I do here in the States. So I came here um, almost 10 years ago now to college to study. Then like first 2 years of my college years, I studied more like about culture and humanities, like everything about psychology or anthropology, literature, things like that. Then when I think when like the end of my second year, I saw a poster of like an audition. So I got like I went there. Then fortunately I got casted. It was like one of the Beckett's plays.
Which one?
Um, the one I did was What Where. Yeah, so it kind of like opened up my world in a way that like I can it sort of felt like I could see a different world through a different perspective. And that was like exciting. And it kind of like triggered me into the theater world. So since then, I started learning like more theater. Like I started taking more theater classes, like directing, acting, and designing in general.
Hmm.
And I took a couple of lighting design classes and like sound design classes, along with like directing and acting. Um, so that's
What
like
what university was that?
I went to Hampshire College,
Mhm.
but it's like one of the five college systems. So like I could take classes in any one of the colleges. So like Smith College, Mount Holyoke, Amherst, and UMass. And that's basically what I did. Like I took classes everywhere. So I was more of like a five college student rather than like Hampshire kid.
Wow, good for you.
Yeah.
I was going to say to our listeners that, first of all, did you learn English in China? You must have, I suppose.
Yeah, we had some like basic English classes in school. Then I went to like international high school over there, which was a boarding school. So that's where I learned
Yeah,
English most.
because if you've been there, if it's just you said not even 10 years, you're extraordinary. You have an extraordinary ear. Um, I was going to say to our listeners that, if you think of a film like Jaws, for example, um, when most people, when they hear the name Jaws, they think of that music cue of the shark underneath the water. And from what I understand, Steven Spielberg, the director of that film, was having problems with the mechanical shark. And so what he did was he just shot the water. And only afterwards, in post production, did they figure out how to make it scary. And I must say, just looking at that water and hearing that music cue was terrifying. And that's just an example, one example, of how sound can be used, in that case in a film. But it's not just music, of course. When you get a script for the theater, would you just let us know a little bit about what your process is? And I'm talking now just about sound, and then we'll go into some of the other things as well. But how do you work with the script, and what makes you decide what kind of sound, or if there should be sound at all?
When I get a script, I think I first read the play, of course, then I will basically have an idea and what do I not hear, and also I will ask questions to myself, like what do people usually hear in our like daily basis, and what people don't hear in the daily basis, and how like what we hear or even what we don't hear can tell a story, or convey some emotion. The world is too busy, and even like a slight moment of like being silent could do a lot. Then um, then I'm also like always interested in how sound works with other departments. Like I think two parts basically for sound, like content. One is like more like unconventional kind of sound. Um, when we see some conventional plays, we hear some sound cues like ding, like a bell or telephone ringing. Those are like moments of like actually let me think about this more.
Sure, sure. Well, as you're thinking, let me just say that, it's so fascinating to me when I work with sound designers as a director, the questions that they ask, and then oftentimes it makes me a better director having wonderful sound designers. So for example, we're always trying to be specific. So it might just say in the script, the doorbell rings, but what kind of doorbell? It is a ding dong doorbell or a buzzer. Is the doorbell something that's threatening or something that's funny? Does it tell you something about the character who lives in that particular place? So something as simple as that, or in a place, for example, there may be nothing. I'd say anything in the script, but the sound designer might say, when she goes to the window, what if I had some pigeons or cooing pigeons on the window? And that would say there's a world out there. Or when they open the door, should we hear a dog barking in the distance, or a baby crying, or other people on the stairs, or the opposite? Should it be absolutely silent? And that's a choice in and of itself. I always, when I'm directing a play, I think about what the audience will hear even as they walk into the theater before the play begins. So I did one play, for example, that took place on an oyster boat, because I live in Cape May, New Jersey, and lots of, we live by the sea. And so sometimes, we'll have music about that references the play. But in this particular case, we had the creaking of a boat in a dock. So we heard the water lapping, and we heard the squeaking that a boat makes when it's just, in dock. And many people thought that the boat actually moved. It never did, but they actually thought it had, partly because of the sound and the way we lit it. They asked me afterwards, some people, how did you get it to that movement on the boat? And I said, well, there really wasn't any. So I throw it back to you to decide what kind, whether there should be music or whether there should be a sound effect, or and do you think about that before you even meet with the director, or is it something that you get from a director?
I think it depends on what type of director I'm working with.
Sure.
But also usually I do have like a general vision, like of what we hear or what we don't hear once I read the script. And sometimes like I would talk about ideas with the director, and depending on what type of director I'm working with, sometimes I have directors who knows like exactly what they want, and in that way I will more be like on the supporting end, like what's more, like what more I hear or I don't hear that's like not in the script, or that you didn't hear, that might be like another possibility or interesting part we can like play with. Sometimes I work with directors who's more like this is my vision of the show, but I fully like trust you on like what you can bring onto the table. So in that way, I will have like some like samples or ideas of what sound we could play with. Then more like in the rehearsal rooms, we play with them while rehearsing,
Yeah.
especially for some of like experimental plays. That's like where playing in the room with the performers and director actually works better.
Yeah, at Cape May Stage, we from day one have the sound in rehearsal from the even even like just right after the first read through. It may change. I mean, it may be that after rehearsing with that sound, we realize that it might be better with a different sound or no sound, or the sound designer himself or herself may decide, I know you're all happy with that, but I have another idea, and bring that in.
Yeah, I think it's pretty important for the director and also the performers to have the sound the first day of rehearsal. Um, it's also like, some shows I worked with are more like dance movement based.
Right.
And so like being in the room, um, actually it's like their script in a way to like
Yeah.
allow them to create what they're doing.
No, I'm just thinking as you're speaking, there was last year we did a really interesting play called The Taming, and it was an all-female crew and cast and writer and so on. And at one point, I think the script called for the Star Spangled Banner to be done, and the sound designer found RuPaul. So we have a transvestite version of the Star Spangled Banner, which was perfect for the world of that play because it was kind of a send up of some of certain American history, but also American culture.
Mhm.
And RuPaul, really kind of informed, what the style of that play was going to be. I know you've worked a lot in experimental theater and dance, and I think you like that, yes?
Yeah, I do. I'm I like, to me there are two different types of theater I do, like more conventional, whereas like, the sound cues are kind of like conventional in a way, like doorbell, knock knock, or telephone. Um that way like I could play with more of like where the sound are played and how to use like different tones to help storytelling. Then the other type I really like a lot, it's whereas it's more, it involves more collaboration in a way, um, more collaboration in the theater rehearsal rooms, um, and also I feel like it sort of relates to composing like music, and also like the scale of sound, not only like things we hear normally, maybe like a drums sound, or
Mhm.
like mechanical sound. For example, like we were talking about a show that have like puppets in it. Then they were thinking to have like puppet on the rolling rope and like rolling to the audience area. So in that sense, I was like, what I hear was like, the sound in the room, like the mechanical, the sound that the mechanics creates in the room. So in a sense, it's like scale in a larger, like sound in the larger scale and sound in the smaller scale, which like sometimes people could ignore in their daily lives.
Yeah. Well, you just did some sound for Cape May Stage that was so wonderful. It was a play called Grave Diggers, and it was about two guys who were digging a grave during COVID-19. And the script called for certain sounds like digging, obviously, or they were breathless because they were digging. One was an older character, one was a younger character. And there were birds and tiny things that had to do with like a one character pulls out a gun and there's the click of the gun. That click could have been 100 different things, and you found it sounds funny to say this to someone who's not involved in the world that you and I know, but to find the right click, did you just come upon it instantly, or did you go through hundreds of clicks before you found the one you liked?
The latter. Like I always do, like go through like thousands of stuff, then found the one I'm like, oh, this is the one. And,
right.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I think there's like three big categories. I mean, there's categories of just naturalistic sound, like a doorbell or telephone. But even a telephone, is it a contemporary telephone, or is it a telephone from the 90s, or from a telephone that's even older than that, from the a landline, in the days when there were no cell phones and all of that sort of thing. And then there's music, of course, and sometimes scoring something. So there's no literal music going on. I mean, it's not like the character's listening to the radio, unless they are. But it might be that somebody is just saying something that's so emotional, it feels like it wants to have something underneath it to support it. And so to find the right music cue that, again, doesn't interfere with the actor. Sometimes if there's too much, if there are lyrics and the character's speaking, it might interfere unless you're skilled at what you're doing, and it works. And then there are non realistic sound effects, like you said, like a percussive sound, like on Law and Order. In Law and Order, the television show, there's always that kind of bump, before a scene starts. And sometimes that's exactly what you want. So it's something to tell the audience that the scene is beginning in an abrupt way. I mean, that's a style in that particular television show. But what it says is we're interrupting. I mean, that sound feels like an interruption on purpose. So, and sometimes, of course, we want something to be not interrupted, but something that's very graceful and allows something to flow, into the next. What's your favorite sound effects that you've done?
Favorite sound effects?
Yeah, I mean, favorite. I mean, in terms of like, was there a particular production where you think, wow, that was fun. That's what I really want to
do. I guess going back to the Gravediggers, because one thing I found that's different from theater sound while working on it was like, since it's a radio play, so all people can like get the stories from the sound. There's like nothing they can see.
Right.
Like in theaters, people can get the story from the visuals and sound as like a combination. But like as an audio play, it's like the actions, characters, emotions, or the story, like everything has to be conveyed through sound. That was like one part that I found really interesting, and also fun to play with, like the details of sound, like, even like the action of, you pull out a phone. Like usually in theaters, we don't hear that. We just like see people doing that action. But in radio play, I can actually play with the sound of like, oh, people are pulling out a phone, and you hear that small action like people don't usually hear or
Yes.
not pay attention to.
Such an interesting form of storytelling. Of course, before there was television, people listened to radio and radio dramas. And it just so happens that part of my resume is that I used to be involved in soap operas on television. But of course, they all began on the radio. And so you'd have these scripts where, someone would say, put down that gun, because of course you couldn't see it.
Mhm.
And occasionally, even when we were on television, the scripts would still have that kind of radio feel where they would say, put down that gun. And we would say, you don't need to say, put down the gun. We can see it's a gun. Put it down is fine, But that's a very interesting storytelling technique. How do you want to say what's happening? How do you communicate what's happening? Or do you even need to communicate what's happening? Or should it just be poetic? Purposely mysterious. So we have to discover maybe 2 or 3 beats later what just happened. It's I must say I find the whole sound as a tool a fascinating one. Now, in your case, you've also been involved with marrying sound with light and projection and putting them all together. Talk to me a little bit about that, and where did you do it, and what was it like?
In general, like I do design like separately. Like people hire me as like one category, like either lighting designer or sound designer or projection designer. But recently, I think like one here and there, people do hire me as like a multidisciplinary. So it's like either lighting or sound, or lighting or projection, or sound or projection, like a combination of two. And since pandemic, I guess my work got into more like everything, like 3 of them all together, since everything is digital, and it kind of like involves lighting, sound, and like video or projection in the sense, like all together as like one design element. So before, it was more like, I sometimes if I do both, then I try to use lighting as like part of scenic as much as possible. Like there was one show I did where the creator, like when we were in the talking or idea generating process, she was talking about like when she does her rehearsal, there's like a pattern she follows to help her to tell stories, because it's like she's playing different characters in a way. So then it's like a low budget show in a way. So she didn't have a scenic designer. So it was only me and her as like the main collaborators. Then that idea of like the pattern triggered me in a way that, okay, so maybe there could be like a way a lighting can create that path as like part of scenic to help her to tell the story. So I used some string lights on the floor to create that pattern, and also some lights hanging in the ceilings to create some depth. So in a way, like she was also playing with the patterns created by lighting in like shows. So that was like one thing that doing multidisciplinary design allows me to do, to kind of like integrate or connect all the design elements together more.
Yeah. Well, I know, lighting designers often will use the metaphor of painting with light. They'll say, I wanted to paint this, or use a particular palette it needs to have blues or ambers or whatever you're working with in the theater. It's an interesting thing when you talked about budget, because I mean, I've worked at very high end and very, very low end. And you think about, for example, on Broadway, when they had a lot of money, I saw the Harry Potter plays with all sorts of special effects. And they combined exactly what you just said. They combined projections, sound, and lights to create. I must say, I mean, this is my business, and I know a little bit about how this works, but I never figured this out, and I'm glad I didn't, because it's so magical. But there's a moment in that Harry Potter where it feels as if the entire building was like a rubber band, like it was elongated and pulled and then snapped back in. And all I can think is there must have been a projection of the set that was slightly off the frame, and the sound effect and a lighting effect simultaneously happening. And of course, all of this is computerized, so that it felt and I have a feeling they maybe even did something to the seats that we were sitting in. So they kind of rumbled or did something. And it really, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm being pulled, but of course it wasn't. And then the simplest thing, when you just have a screen and a shadow, you can backlight something, and somebody walks toward the screen or away from the screen, and they get bigger or smaller. Mm-hmm. And that is an enormous statement, just that in and of itself. The old-fashioned shadow puppets, which I believe began in China. Am I right? Do you know?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. It has a long history there.
Yeah. I think shadow puppets began at like 1500 BC. It's funny that, I was just reading about theater history, and I always thought that Western theater began in Greece, and I was learning about other cultures. I mean, in China, in Japan, in Persia, and in Africa, learning about other forms of ritual storytelling in various ways. But of course, so many things began in China, and Latin fireworks, of course, so any kind of pyrotechnics. Have you been involved in any of that sort of thing? With pyrotechnics?
Not much.
Yeah. That's a whole nother category, I suppose. And of course it involves in our country, fire marshals, and, particularly these days, so you have to really, everything is done according to code. And my theater, Cape May, is so, fire destroyed the entire city at one point. And so everybody is very, very conservative about what kind of, even a smoke machine that has no flame, but the fog can set something off and make it appear that there's a fire happening, and alarms go off and theaters get shut down. So we're very, very careful about how we use that stuff. Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about some of your other projects. Where have you been working? Is it in Philadelphia mostly, or?
New York.
Oh, New York.
Yeah, I'm more based in New York. I worked at more like off-Broadway or off-Broadway, like experimental theater companies like La Mama.
Well, La Mama is one of the greatest theater companies. Internationally renowned company. That was Ellen Stewart was the leader of it for many, many years. I knew her. We weren't like we were friends, but I met her many times, and admired her enormously.
Yeah, I wish I had a chance to meet her.
Yeah,
I came to New York a couple of years after she passed. Yeah, but her spirit is always there.
Yeah, certainly. She always had a little bell. Speaking of sound,
yeah,
she would start her her little curtain speech with a little bell.
Yeah,
and brought so many companies from all over the world. Oftentimes puppet shows and dance shows, as well as avant-garde theater.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I did shows at JAG, in Brooklyn.
Yes.
um, public theater. We went to public theater like this year, like under the Radar Festival.
Oh yeah, Under the Radar. Yeah, yeah. The public theater also. Again, you've worked at some of the greatest theaters in New York. La Mama Public. I mean, you can afford Manhattan anymore. Although it's changing again, isn't it, with COVID?
Yeah. Yeah.
This time down, do you find yourself working more in film and doing, or is it?
I did, I guess, a couple of different things. Like I did one show that's a puppet show over Zoom with seniors.
Wow.
So basically, like seniors, like two artists I've been working with before. They are like puppeteers and dancers, and also like teach the seniors how to make puppets. Then the puppets would generate their own stories based on the puppets they made. So I was kind of like doing lighting, sound, video, more like in the sense of like design, like the Zoom design. Or
so the sound, the puppets were creating their own stories. And did you have all of the sound effects at your disposal? Did you have to go back and find the sound and do it after you saw what the story was?
Basically, the process, like we once we know what the story they were trying to tell, that like mostly they wrote their own stories, so like everything was original. Then we would schedule individual Zoom meetings with them. Then we record them as part like the final performance, like how they manipulate the puppets and how they act in Zoom.
Were they hand and rod puppets? Were they the puppets? Were they hand? Were they puppets?
Originally? Then the COVID, like the pandemic happened, so they were already in the process. So they couldn't change the design of the puppet at all. So the puppet was like as big as a human size.
Yeah, that's like Farabaku, like the Japanese style of puppets.
Yeah,
you have 3 or 4 manipulators sometimes. Yes.
So they were like performing with the like the puppet as like another character.
Right.
One or two have different puppets. Like one used record them. Then I add like background effects in video editing, and also add some sound effect or even like music to help tell the story.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, so that was one thing I did. Then the other one I did recently was like a small group of us. Like, do you know Ping Chong?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
He's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the same. Like we also had another project before COVID. Then after COVID, the project got postponed. So he made this project into like a film version of the same thing. We actually went into a studio with like a couple of us, like me doing lighting design and someone filming and actors, also with like a green screen. So that will eventually turn out to be like a short version of film.
It's amazing that you've worked with Ping Chong. I mean, you've worked with some of the most important people working today. And
yeah.
I don't know, you don't have to tell me, but you seem very young. How have you met all of these people?
I'm very fortunate. I feel I have to say that. Then I think it's more like when I was in school, I took classes everywhere.
Sure.
So I happen to know a couple of the professors who are my mentors and are my friends now.
Right. Sure.
And they like I met Roger Babb at Mount Holyoke, then Charlotte Braithwaite at Amherst. All I guess active, or they've been active like in New York also as like theater makers. So they in a way kind of like brought me to New York and like introduced me to like La Mama, Pinchon and all the
Right.
like from there I guess my like art community kind of expanded, which
You
I'm
know, earlier when you were talking about, you mentioned Samuel Beckett, I think. You did a play of Samuel Beckett's when you were first, that really brought you to the theater. And we did a Samuel Beckett play at Cape May Stage, which is unusual because we're a commercial kind of theater. And many times people, in fact, there were some people, to this day, there are people who want to kill me for doing a play that was, you know, sort of challenging. Some people thought it was the best thing they'd ever seen, and others still, you know, are beating me up, which I'm happy for. You know, I think it's a good thing. But we did a play called Happy Days, and that play begins with a woman buried to her waist in sand. And my concept at the time was that it happens right outside of Cape May because we're at a beach, but it was on the beach of Cape May after a nuclear explosion. And Michael Starobin, who won the, I think, Nobel Prize actually for Next to Normal, he arranged the music for that Broadway show, was such a fan of Samuel Beckett. He asked if he could create a soundscape for before the play begins, and he did. And what he created was the sound of the sea, and then the sound of boardwalk, you know, like carnival noises and children giggling and laughing, and a Ferris wheel and so forth. And it was very eerie. I mean, it was not a fun thing. It was more of a disturbing, like if the world had ended after some terrible nuclear holocaust, this is what was left, like the echoes of the people who had been there. And then the lights went up, and we did the play as Samuel Beckett wrote it, you know, with only the sound that he orchestrated in his script, because he's very specific about every pause and every silence and so on. But it's just such an amazing, he's such an amazing author who had such an extraordinary influence on so many people. And I'm thrilled to hear that it brought you into the theater as well. Because you said you were studying everything from literature to history, and then you discovered this art form.
Yeah. I didn't know what to do, like even though I was studying like anthropology and like everything else.
Yes.
Then once, I guess after this play, I was like, oh, this is like what I want to do. It's like,
right. That was your home, so to speak.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we're going to be working together next season, I hope. If you know, COVID is always. I just realized the light is crazy on my side because of the sun. You know, who knows what's going to happen with the virus? But we have all kinds of plans to make sure that Cape May Stage will be performing, even if it's in a tent, if it's not in our actual building. And of course, sound will become a very, very important part of it. And the very first play we're doing is a play about the former governor of Texas, Ann Richards, whose daughter was the head of Planned Parenthood. And it's a play called Anne. It was done at Lincoln Center in New York. And so it turns out that one of the people who was involved in the producing of it is going to be working as an actor in that particular production. So it should be very exciting. And again, we have a female director. So we'll probably have an all women production team again, which I'm always excited about. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a good thing
that's
when
good.
when we can do that. So anyway, I thank you so much for joining us and telling us a little bit about your work, and we look forward to seeing you again, and hopefully in Cape May.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All righty. All the best. Bye now.